won't speak for long because whenever you see classes in session as an educator, you're in love with the process. You see the light bulbs going on, and so I don't want to interrupt what you guys have happening. My name is Kalimah Priforce, and I'm the headmaster and CEO of an organization called Qeyno Labs. And Qeyno Labs, we launch hackathons, very much like this. But we focus on what we identify as high potential youth in low opportunity settings. And so last year we launched the first hackathon. Actually, you know what, before I even get there, so I was at the Open Society Foundations. The George Soros, he's someone who believes that what he experienced as a kid in Nazi Europe was very similar to what he saw was happening with black males, particularly young black males in America. That there was this marginalization and this sort of path to prison and poverty. And so he then set out to fund the Campaign for Black Male Achievement. And the Campaign for Black Male Achievement started off as it was 2 million, then 5 million, and then suddenly he increased it to about 200 million. So the White House called and said, whoa, this is the largest philanthropic support of these kinds of causes. And so we like to get involved, and that eventually rolled into the My Brother's Keeper initiative. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because I sat in a room where we were talking about the Black Male Achievement campaign, and this is around the time that George Zimmerman was the verdict for his trial related to Trayvon Martin, and he was set free. And there was a conversation that was happening around whether, like, how do many of us who are in the BMOC space, that means Black Men of Color space, what do we do around the Trayvon Martin question and George Zimmerman victory? How do we go back to black males and then tell them that their lives are worth it? When clearly, all the encouragement that we can give them, the news is showing them that their lives are not worth it. And of course, like I said, Open Society Foundation is hosting this conversation because they also care about what's going on. And it's interesting because, so I'm in a room full of other Equity and Green fellows. The health people have something to say about it. The environment sustainability people have something to say about it. Everyone has something to contribute. But the tech fellows, 3 of us, coders, background in either coding or educating around coding, we said nothing. And I noticed it, and so I raised my hand and I said, well, I apologize because a lot of us techies here, we know that Facebook and Google is not having a conversation around Trayvon Martin. We know that this is a very East Coast conversation. But when we go back to Silicon Valley, that it's going to be about what is the app of the week. And even related to what you guys are hacking at GetD, this conversation is not even happening in schools. Because the way that schools work, they work in a very sort of hive-like model, where not even the curriculum can change depending on what's happening right outside. And so I said, okay, well, that's not happening. No, I said, Silicon Valley doesn't want to answer the question, could an app have saved Trayvon Martin? Because when Trayvon Martin was approached, when he was stalked by George Zimmerman, he had a phone in his hand. And this is the same experience that women have, where there's technology at their disposal, they feel threatened, and there's no app on that phone that could possibly help them in a situation like that. Because we're not creating technology that meets every condition. We're creating technology that is about, can I order pizza at 3 a.m.? Who's going to pick up my laundry? Those sort of problems, the big problems. I love when I'm at hackathons and the judges talk about, that's such a big problem, who's going to pick up your laundry? And so I came back to Silicon Valley. And by the way, the head of the Campaign for Black Male Achievement, when he tweeted that question, couldn't happen to say Trayvon Martin, it got retweeted hundreds of times, and there was this explosion of conversation happening online. And the conversation was not just around the technology sector app development and social justice and racial justice. But there was also a segment of the Black community, of the brown community, the Latino community, who said, well, how dare you even ask a question like that? Technology can't solve these problems. There shouldn't even be an attempt for technology to solve these problems. The problem is too big. And so, being a hacker, I decided, well, I want to continue this conversation, and I want to make everybody, I just want to make everybody upset, and by continuing this conversation. And so then I decided to, well, and in order to have a conversation in Silicon Valley, no conference, no forum, you're not going to have let's have a hackathon. Let's have a hackathon. Let's have programmers and engineers in Silicon Valley working with kids in Oakland. And not only that, so to keep it from being a colonizing experience, as I call it, let's have some of those same folks who are in the churches and community programs and a lot of those who are in activist communities in Oakland also work with these kids. Let's have what I call an empathy spillover. And I remember calling Startup Weekend and I said, I'm going to launch this hackathon. And then I learned at that moment that Startup Weekend had never done a hackathon in Oakland. I don't think there's a country Startup Weekend has touched, but yet right next door, they never did a hackathon. So it just cares to show you what the technology space is like when it comes to bias and how comfortable we are. Because when I spoke to engineers out of Silicon Valley and asked them to come to Oakland, they said, well, I've never even had a conversation with a Black kid. And so to hack with them, to build something. And so I got everyone together. And people ask what makes Silicon Valley Silicon Valley. And there's a lot of research around this idea of a knowledge spillover. That like hackathons are a product of that knowledge spillover. And the knowledge spillover effect is that there's transparency. And we can share ideas, we can communicate. And we don't have to worry about, well, now unless you're Apple, Samsung, or when you're making the big bucks, about IP. I mean, there's not this conversation around, for an investor to receive a document stating that, I pitched my idea to you, and a non-disclosure agreement, I pitched my idea to you, and then we don't work that way. We know because we want things to move at the speed of innovation. And so, but why is it that we can't feel at the speed of innovation? And what I wanted was that for this interaction to take place, I didn't want this to be just a whole bunch of adults saving the lives of these kids. It's not a charity case. That I want these kids to be able to be seen as the next Dr. King, the next Malcolm X, the next Steve Jobs, the next Mark Zuckerberg, the next Amelia Earhart, the next Eleanor Roosevelt. And I want these kids to be perceived as assets and not a deficit in society. You're not saving them. We're investing in new talent that we don't have to import from abroad. And so I close with this. What was created at that event and then duplicated in New Orleans, which was funded by Prince. Yes, that Prince. And then with My Brother's Keeper in Philadelphia and then in Oakland. We're doing a hackathon in Albuquerque, New Mexico, for Native American youth. Can you imagine that? And that hackathon is called a Gathering of Nations. Young Native American youth at reservations all around the country are gathering in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the Native American Charter Academy. And they'll be exposed to computer science, they'll be exposed to coding, they'll be exposed to designing, they'll be exposed to solving problems using 21st century tools with age-old wisdom from their grandmas, from their grandfathers. I call it the empathy spillover. When we talk about decentralization, we're not talking about disconnection. We're actually talking about that the systems that we have in place right now have us so disconnected that we think that this systems integration is actually helping us when, if anything, it's making us poor. Because Malcolm Gladwell says that poverty is not desperation or even deprivation, that poverty is isolation. And so these kids building apps, that's great. But I always say that the first thing that we teach them is to hack their own isolation. And it's the same thing we teach to their mentors, is to hack their own isolation, to connect with those kids. And so as you're continuing forward, think about that decentralization is how we can get reconnected to one another. And I'll take any questions.
How are you actually following up with folks? Because my partner and I were in the Impact Hub a week after that hackathon, and we talked to the woman who won it, and she's like, nobody's followed up with me. Nobody from the Priforce Center has called. Zero communication. And we came away from that conversation being like, well, it's great that they did that weekend and it was inspiring for that time, and how is the organization actually connecting and accountable to the youth that it's engaging with? Because that didn't really sound like it to us.
So, very interesting process. When you go from a software development company for years, Daniel Goldman here is on our advisory board, and he's been with us for a very long time. So he's seen us go through this transition of application development to now doing hackathons. When you take a step like that and you say, okay, we're going to do hackathons, right? And then you go, okay, all right, so are we for profit, are we not profit? Like, how do we function? One of the most important things was that we still continue to develop a product, right? And so each hackathon is its iteration. It's hackathon 1.0, 1.1, 1.2. And what we learned when we went from the beta hackathon to New Orleans a couple months later was that being able to track progress and be able to follow up with folks post-hackathon, we said, well, you know what? That's what hackathons in general do poorly, right? Because what happens is that when hackathons end, then that's when society kicks in. Those who have resources get to develop their app. Those who don't, the app dies. And so we said, okay, you know what? Then that's what we're going to find ways to invest and cultivate these ideas. What we learned, this is a very sort of lean testing approach. What we learned was that a lot of those who came out of our hackathons, that the organizations that we were involved in, we were beginning to step on their toes. And so let's say you go to Hack the Hood, you go to Hack the Future, and there's a whole lot of organizations like that. You go to Youth Radio, Youth Impact, all these different organizations, and you say, okay, let's have your youth be a part of our hackathon experience. They join our hackathon experience, and then after the hackathon, we all go to the same funder. And one of those kids takes the AP course in computer science. Who takes credit for that? Whose metric is that? Yeah. And that actually matters to those organizations.
Well, okay.
And so in our conversation with them, they said, you know what? This is what we really need. Is that we need not the kids to be the customer, we need to be the customer. And then we thought about that and we said, okay, so all of these organizations, since Qeyno is directly connected to Silicon Valley, having these conversations, why not we develop those organizations on the ground who are continuously developing and cultivating the relationship that they have with these kids? And what we found out was that no matter where we went, New Orleans, Philadelphia, all the different places, when Qeyno does its thing and we have our hackathon, we're considered a social pariah if we just stick. See, now we're centralizing, right? We're social pariah. If we stick around and then we start to dominate and we start to track and we start to control what happens with the kids. And so that's when we decided, okay, you know what? Let's not do that. Let's actually continue to develop those kids and those mentors through our community partners. And so now we have what we call a network of networks. And so now whenever we have a hackathon, we have community partners. And so, for example, we have a town hall. prior to our hackathons. And we engage these community partners, and we find ways that we can develop their capacities. And because of that, since we've gone from the first hackathon to the second to the third hackathon, we've already helped launch 3 new organizations that are doing hackathons themselves. And by the time we got to our 4th hackathon, now there are 5 organizations around the country that are continuously doing our work, or they are learning from our model and building a STEM-based program there. So if that person who was engaged in our hackathon, if they were to check in with us, we would let them know, hey, our model is a little bit different now, and we would want you to continue to stay connected to one of our community partners. And so in many ways, our decentralized approach allowed us to become a better neighbor wherever we go to these community partners.
So if I can add, even by the time you were in New Orleans, which was the second one, you had a relationship with Propeller,
Yes.
which is a local incubator space. There's some other incubator space that I don't remember, and those were going to be follow-on homes for people. There was an educational group.
Yes.
There was one of the other judges.
Yes, that was
they're
already Matt Chandler.
noticing that is a deficit in the system, but doing things
I'm not talking
incrementally.
about talking to, I totally understand that it's disintermediate, right? And I think it was just really sad
Oh yeah, I mean
that nobody talked to the winner about how, like, anyways, this is
Yeah.
gonna happen and it's sad, but I'm glad to hear all the learning that's happening, and it sounds like the model's evolving, and that's really cool.
And a lot of people did stay connected. Sharon
Yeah.
wrote a book. So other people stayed connected. To some of it may be the individual and not the environment as well.
Yeah. So have her contact us, and then we'll see what we can do. Yeah.
She was only the winner, but anyways, okay.
Wait, she was the winner of the hackathon?
Yeah,
Which
no,
one was,
that's awesome.
who's her name? What's her name?
It
You
was
don't know
a
her
long
name?
time ago.
Okay.
And we had one really in-depth conversation. She was like, yeah, nobody's talked to me.
Okay,
And
'cause
it
the-
was just sad.
Yeah, because the winner of the hackathon actually was with us in New Orleans, actually.
Okay, so maybe you did reach out to her and it was too
Yeah, so just check in with her and to see
Yeah.
how she's doing. Anyone have any other question? I don't want to take up too much of you guys' time.
Can I add one other thing which I think is so important about what Qeyno is doing, one of many things that's important, and it's along the lines of what the Civic Makers do, and I think they've been here as well, Lawrence and Brian, is it's not just about hacking technology. Someone had the shirt up here, or maybe it was at the event last night, different event last night, said, if you can't open it, you don't own it. And this idea that you're hacking technology coming together for these hackathons, this is lighting up kids about ownership of their society, ownership of their world. And I see how these kids leave it inspired by that, and having new people to collaborate with. And we talked about, one of the conversations here was a lot about the importance of community and like-minded people, and people who can facilitate you not just through the technical journey, but the emotional journey that you're going to go through. And that's a big piece of what these events really bring for people.
Yeah. I agree. And it's also, like I said, that empathy spillover, it's a transformative effect for those mentors. Our last hackathon, one of the mentors was so moved because, once again, there was a question of what's going to happen with the kids after the hackathon. And so we connected that kid to a program. We were able to provide him with free internet he didn't have before. But his mentor actually took a step further and actually bought him a laptop. He bought 2 other kids involved in a laptop. And he said it's because and we asked him, he said, wow, that's incredible. He said that it was because he saw them as investments, and that they're only a couple of years younger than Mark Zuckerberg. And so can you imagine investing in Mark Zuckerberg a year or 2 years before their trajectory?
What are you doing in terms of helping alternative models to financing and capital? Because I find it somewhat disturbing that communities are framing it as a black Mark Zuckerberg, whereas Facebook basically went out to monopolize and exploit and extract value of unpaid data. and that's not particularly progressive or transformative. So like, are there alternative narratives of funding and, you know, like what are we aspiring to build? Monopoly internet projects or decentralized ones?
So it sounds like there's two questions. One is the perception of Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, and whether there should be a black version of that. And the other question is around funding models, business models. So in terms of the black Mark Zuckerberg, it's a phrase that, you know, I also have issues with. I'd rather say a techie Dr. King. And so I go back and forth between that, and as well as, you know, let's not keep it so gender locked, you know. So let's say a techie Amelia Earhart or a techie Harriet Tubman, and so there's that. And then when it comes to in terms of a business model, yeah, we sell our hackathons, and then when we sell our hackathons, we also are funded by foundations and grants in order to support our operational budget. So in our mixed model allows for not only for us to stay as this 3-day academy, as this hackathon academy, in terms of our operational budget, but our sales model allows us for us to experiment, so we stay a lab.
Cool. But are you also inviting the youth to think differently about the business models behind what they're doing?
That is if we were a traditional school. Then we would hand out a curriculum that would more so focus on what they should be thinking about, as opposed to, we truly believe that in a hackathon space, we leave it up to them and we leave it up to their relationship with their mentor. So the only way that you can get them to start thinking differently about the economy, about health, about the environment, is if you are actually working with them. And so don't put the onus, because that's our relationship with education right now. We're so quick to say that should be happening in the schools, but how many of us are actually stepping into those schools? And so the hackathon experience is very different. If you want these kids to think differently about something, then actually work with them. Spend 3 days with them. And you know what? They may have you think differently about other things as well.
So in Albuquerque, do you have partners down there that you're working with?
Yes, we're working with the Native American Charter Academy, but we would love to work with increased partners. Yeah.
The Kellogg Foundation has a senior guy down there I'm connected to.
Okay.
And
yeah.
He's Native American, and so exactly what they're looking to support.
I love it. We're also talking to College Board right now, and they're also interested because when it comes to because College Board's business model, the SATs are being de-emphasized, and so they're focusing on their AP model, their advanced placement model, and so and when it comes to Native American youth, like a lot of those exams aren't even made available on the reservations, and so they want to think differently about it, and they want to learn. And we told them, we said, okay, all right, yeah, your money is great, but we actually want you to step in, work with these young people, and you can actually develop strategies as to how do you get these kids to be better prepared for college. Thank you. Yeah, it'd be great to connect with you.
Any more questions?
I guess it's more of a comment, and would love to have your response and anybody else's to hackathons. So I've gone to a few, organized a few. I haven't seen much of the work product out of the hackathon itself be terribly useful in itself. The relationships built, great. As a sort of an informal interview structure in the broad sense of trying to understand what it's like to work with different people, great. As a mechanism of communicating much more in a grounded way, of sort of how does something work and how do you work together with something, great. But the idea of actually seeing work product out of it feels sort of as fleeting as success stories in microfinance, or some other sort of snarky line of sort of like, yeah, there's another picture of that same person with a cow, and everybody else gets smushed. But so, what are hackathons actually good for in your concrete experience in your environment or other people that have been to these sorts of things, what is it? What do they do for us?
So I would, great. Okay, so I'm going to make a blind assumption. Most of the hackathons that you've been to, and that you've maybe even organized, were mostly white, mostly male, and definitely unhealthy. And that's the thing, is that when we tried to hack the hackathon model, we wanted to make it different. And in the conversation that we had with several others around how to build this new hackathon model, it was a question of, okay, so there's I grew up with a formal Buddhist education, and one of the monks used to always tell me the story of the mouse, and why the mouse made it to the Chinese New Year. And it said it's because the mouse knew that it couldn't keep up with the rest of the animals. So one world was ending and another world was beginning. And so it climbed on the back of a turtle, and it was allowed to then hop off the turtle and then jump into the new year. And that's how you have the mouse. Hackathon is the turtle. So the question is, for us, what's really happening during that hackathon? During that hackathon, these kids are registered. And so what means they're registered, that they are now on our radar. So that digest of organizations now that we have, Youth Radio, Youth Impact, this organization, we try to keep around at least 25 organizations. They now know who this kid is. And so now this kid is under their radar. This kid is no longer invisible. This kid is no longer isolated. And so we even send an email out to their principal. And we said, thank you for allowing so-and-so. And the principal more than likely doesn't even know that the child is registered in the hackathon. Thank you for allowing this kid to be a part of this hackathon experience. This is what they're learning. They're learning rapid prototyping skills. They're learning how to pitch. They're learning design thinking. We give them a whole what the curriculum is. And so there's that. The other parts of it is that our hackathons have some of the best food that we can find in the city. And so for these kids, so once again, you go to hackathon, the food's and so. But for these kids, it's one of the first times that they've ever actually had any organic food. It's the first time that these kids have ever had. And so, and I could keep listing down the benefits. But when it comes down to it, the app development is the lower hanging fruit. It's like, okay, they build an app, that's great, they learn some skills, wonderful, terrific. What I'm really excited about is Zachary Dorsonville, who crowdfunded his way to our New Orleans hackathon and was able to create an app in our Philadelphia hackathon. So it's 2 hackathons that was able to deal with his childhood depression when his mother died. And so he created an app called Recuperate. Or Victoria Pinnell, who drove from New York City to New Orleans in order to help create an app that fights human trafficking. Or George Hofstetter in Oakland, who created an app called Cop Stop, which is an app that helps minority youth with the conversation, a digital version of the conversation that they tend to have with their parents as to how to deal with police officers and live. And so it becomes this transformative, really amazing experience that we no longer question what Disney does for kids, right? They have a magical kingdom and they play and they play and they play. It's great. Wonderful. Play is important. But what happens after the play? What happens when the kid actually wants to transform their play into modeling and they actually want to become future astronauts? What happens when they want to become computer engineers? And that's what we do with these hackathons. So the hackathon, whatever the hackathons happen, and that's one of the reasons why I've supported Joaquin in this hackathon, is that it allows for these kind of conversations. You and I may have never met before. It allows for these conversations to happen and then actually take it a step further than just a conversation. Because that's what decentralization is about. Conversations, we can have conversations that we're blue in the face. Unless there's a shift in power, unless we're actually making people powerful, then we're not doing much. And it's my hope that the hackathon as a turtle is really hiding, disguising this mouse that is more than Mickey Mouse. It's more like Mighty Mouse. that is making these kids feel powerful as they're going through this experience. We have 3 days to transform their lives, and it's those 3 days that we make work for.
Thank you so much.